I've looked after. So, as Kate said, I am the UK podcast partner manager and producer at Spotify. So my job is, well, it's dead good. It's kind of twofold, really. Part of it is looking after our relationships with everyone who's got a podcast in the UK, basically. So everyone from the BBC to The Guardian, to The Telegraph, to production companies, independent podcasters. Everyone who's got a podcast in the UK, I sort of am their first port of call, and I'll help them out accordingly. But I also look after events and sponsorship, sales, marketing, bit of everything, really. We're quite a small team out of the UK. There's only 5 of us at the moment, but we're kind of obviously globally growing all the time. But yeah, Sound Up is something that I work on as well. It's something I'm very passionate about. We did it in Manchester this year. So yeah, over the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to explain a bit about what it is, why we did it in Manchester, why we do it, why it's so important. It took me ages to get this gift to work, so I'm just going to leave it for just one more. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Okay, so what is Sound Up? Basically speaking, it is designed to uplift and amplify voices that we don't hear enough of in podcasting. So this is a global initiative that we've started at Spotify. It's based out of the US. So my esteemed colleague Natalie Tullock, who was over here last week, who's based out of our New York office, designed this scheme basically to help us uplift and amplify voices that we don't hear enough of. In the US and the UK, we identified women and non-binary people of colour as the main area that we wanted to focus on. We've done this globally now in 4 territories: US, UK, Germany, and Australia. In Germany, they focused on LGBTQ podcasters. In Australia, they focused on Australian First Nationals. Basically, it's an intensive week-long accelerator program. We kind of informally call it a boot camp. It's basically a week of training for people to learn how to make podcasts, everything that they'd need to know, from interview techniques to marketing to legal aspects of podcasting, a crash course essentially in how to make podcasts. The only criteria, if you're in the UK, is that you have to be identified as a woman or non-binary person of colour, and you have to have a dead good podcast idea. So this year we had about 600 applications, and we whittled that down to a short list of 20 really good ideas, and then we interviewed the top 20 and chose our 10. Invited 10 women of colour to come to Manchester this year. Last year we did it in London. To hear from speakers across the industry, predominantly people of colour and women, on their area of expertise. So people we had this year included Renee Richardson, who runs Broccoli Content, Ruth Fitzsimons, who's head of Podfront, talking about revenue. We had people from Roundhouse Radio come up from London to kind of help people with their ideas and workshop them. But yeah, it's basically a week of lessons, essentially, on how to make podcasts. We're also quite conscious that we don't want it just to be classroom-based. We want to get out and do other bits. This is quite an embarrassing picture of me looking like I'm blessing a table of food for some reason. I don't really know what's going on there. So we had a mixer event. So the principal down opposite Oxford Road Station were kind enough to give us basically a floor full of rooms that we sort of set up our classroom in. But we also had a mixer event at the Refuge, the restaurant there, where we invited members of the industry just to come down and speak to the cohort about their ideas, help them workshop it. So yeah, that's me introducing all of our cohorts. So we had 10 attendees, and I got them to introduce themselves and their ideas. They did that before every single session to every single speaker, which became quite important, and I'll explain why in a little bit. We also, I can't thank the BBC enough, actually. The BBC were really, really helpful. So we went into 5 Live to go and have a look at their studios. So big thanks to Will Cooper and Alex Entwistle from the BBC, who literally took a day, showed us around their studios, which was really important, because I think from what Johnny was just saying there, a lot of the big podcasts in the UK come from radio. So it's really, really, really important to understand how podcasts work in that context. So we spent the morning in a professional studio environment, and then in the afternoon we showed our cohort how to use a recorder, just simple recorder and a microphone to make podcasts too. So seeing the full scale of how podcasts come into fruition. And then, so we have 4 days of training basically, and then the 5th day on the Friday is the pitch day. So each attendee pitches their idea, combining everything they've learned across the week about interviewing, about putting their content together, and then they pitch to a panel of judges. So our judges were Tom Connaughton on the left-hand side there, the tallest man in the world. Yep. He is the UK MD at Spotify, so he is my boss and everyone in Spotify UK's boss, and he came up from London for the day. And we also had Tolly from The Receipts. The Receipts is a Spotify original podcast that I look after. It's amazing. If you haven't listened to it, you should do. Tolly was really helpful, actually. She did a lot of retweeting of our kind of marketing for the boot camp, and a lot of the girls who applied said that they'd applied because they'd seen Tolly's tweet. So it's great to have her there. And then Aisha Chowdhury, who's on the far right-hand side, who is the Global Business Manager for BBC World Service. So those judges came up, and each member of the cohort had 5 minutes to pitch their idea to the judges. The judges then had 5 minutes to ask questions, and we chose some winners. Normally we have 3 winners, but the cohort was so good this year that we had 4 winners. And the topics that ranged from an adoption story, a podcast about biscuits, a podcast about myths, And the fourth one was a podcast about lesbians. So yeah, quite a wide range, quite a range of ideas. And each of those winners win £10,000 each to kickstart their podcast idea. They'll also get a structured package of mentoring as well, but the 6 that didn't win also are winners because we also give them a structured package of mentoring too, and any other help that they need will help them out with their podcast project getting it started. So why do we do Sound Up UK? It's pretty simple. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this. 22% of podcasts globally are presented by women, and an even smaller, a very tiny percentage of those podcasts are presented by women of colour. So for the US and the UK, that's a massive issue, and that's what we've chosen to kind of focus Sound Up on. And the goal is simple of this programme, it's just to make sure that we are amplifying and bringing more diverse voices into the world of podcasting. I think in the UK and the US specifically, a lot of podcasts do come from radio, which traditionally is quite a male and pale space. That's changing. I think podcasting is changing as well. And we really feel that this is something that we can do to help elevate voices and give them the tools that they need to bring their podcast ideas to life. I'm not going to read this entire quote out, but this is a quote from Reka, who is one of our facilitators. She's Reka Murthy. She's a stalwart of public radio in the States. She sort of put our Sound Up catalogue together, and she comes and facilitates for us. But she says that as a woman of colour, basically, that podcasting is where she's found more diverse voices, but she's had to seek them out in much more of a way than she would have to with radio. Those voices just aren't there in radio. So while the barrier for entry is lower in podcasting, I still think that we're not seeing the voices that we should be seeing and the range of voices. So we really hope that this programme can help change and readdress that balance. Does it work? The simple answer to that is yes. This is 3 of the podcasts that we've had come out of the initiative so far. So the Masala Podcast, that was Sangeeta, one of our winners from the 2018 cohort in London. This is an incredible podcast aimed at British South Asian women predominantly. But I mean, anyone could listen to it and find it just an incredible listen. She's kind of built a bit of a media empire. She's just got a book deal as well. But this podcast basically talks about taboos for women in the British Asian community, British South Asian specifically, sorry. And yeah, it's an incredible podcast. She was one of our winners last year. Dope Labs is one of our winners from the US 2018 Sound Up. It's an incredible podcast which sort of looks at the intersection between statistics and science and real life. And it's a great listen. TT and Zakia were the winners from that one. And that's a Spotify exclusive podcast now. You can only hear it on Spotify, so we bought that from them. And then All About the Money, which was Rahat, was one of our attendees last year. Not one of our winners, but that was a BBC Asian Network commission. So we put her in contact with a production company who were looking for an economist, because her pitch was all about economics for dummies, really. And BBC Asian Network produced, I think, 8 episodes of that for their Deep Down and Desi podcast stream a couple of months ago. And we came to Manchester this year, which, as I say, has been a delight to not be in London, to be outside the M25. But yeah, why Manchester? Well, we did it in London last year, and it was great. But we realised that a lot of people applying were from London. About 95% of the applications last year, we had about 400 applications last year, and about 95% of the applications were from the southeast. And 9 of our cohort were from London, all apart from Rahat, who is from Rochdale, and she now lives in London. So I think that kind of showed us that there's an issue. I'm from Wolverhampton originally, and I had to move to London to get my job. My boss is from Liverpool, he had to move to London to get his job. So I think we've established that if you're a woman, maybe it's a bit more difficult to get a foot in the door. If you're a woman of colour, it's even more difficult to get a foot in the door. If you don't live in London, it's even more difficult to get a foot in the door. So we wanted to make sure that we're looking outside of the M25 for opportunities. Yeah, and so next year, thank you. Thanks, so yeah, this year the cohort was a lot more geographically spread. We had 5 Londoners. We had 2 attendees from Leeds, one of whom now lives in Lincoln. We had Lorraine, who I'm going to embarrass you, I'm going to point, she's over here. So Lorraine, I've put Manchester, London here, so I've done you a disservice. Lorraine is a Scouser who now lives in Manchester. So yeah, that was my typing too quick. Then we had Adey from Coventry, so my West Midlands Mafia sister. Oh, sorry, I just hit my mic. And then we had Esther from Edinburgh, who's one of our winners. Next year, who knows? I think I'm quite keen on doing it outside of England, because I think as much as we've established that opportunities outside the M25 within England are difficult, but we've seen there's lots of really cool podcast scenes springing up outside of England, Glasgow, Cardiff, Dublin particularly. So I think my remit includes Ireland and includes the whole of the UK, so I think we'll probably look at maybe Glasgow next year, who knows? Suggestions welcome, if anyone's got any ideas. But yeah, this is something that's going to run and run. By the end of next year, we're hoping to have it in about 8 territories across Spotify globally. So the next one's going to be in Sao Paulo. We're going to do another one in Australia, another one in Germany, another one in New York. So yeah, it's going to be a massive global thing. Basically, everywhere we have a podcast team, we want to have a Sound Up, because we think it's a global issue that we need to address, different voices being diversified within the podcast industry globally. So yeah, there we go. This is a lovely kind of team picture with all of our cohort. It was me pulling a ridiculous face. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, It was a properly cross-functional effort. So our marketing team, our PR team, our legal team, our sales team, everyone got involved. And I think that's one of the really nice things about Spotify. We're all kind of really pushing together to make sure that we're doing stuff that is valuable. But yeah, there we are. That's it. Thanks so much.
Are you doing it next year?
Yes, we are.
What's the process then? When does it start again?
So we're probably going to do it in November again. So November's our sort of like sound-up month. So we tend to launch applications around August. Okay. We need to decide where we're going to do it, as I say, maybe Glasgow. But we've got further and further north. I feel like a lot of the Americans come over to come and help us out with it. I feel like if I take people from LA to Glasgow in November, they might just like freeze to death. So I'm not sure if we're going to do it in Glasgow. But yeah, so November's when we do it. So we'll probably hear a bit more about it around July and August, which is when we start launching the applications. So yeah.
And can we talk about the daily podcasts?
Absolutely.
Playlist? Okay,
Absolutely.
So one of my favourite things about Spotify, I don't know if it's yours, is that it's actually starting to give listeners a real opportunity to discover podcasts. So I think I can share this. But personally, I do a little daily podcast, and we were looking at the numbers and we're going, why has that episode gone poof, like that? And it turned out, after a bit of searching, that we've ended up on a Spotify playlist. So it's really benefiting me as a podcast maker as much as it is benefiting the listeners. And now you've launched the daily podcast playlist.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So we've just kind of been toying with podcast playlists in general. So we've now got user-generated podcast playlists. You can add podcasts to a playlist, and you can put music in there too. We've got some editorially created playlists. We've also just launched on Tuesday, so literally this is fresh, an algorithmically sourced podcast playlist. So based on what you've listened to, we're now providing podcast recommendations. So that'll be based on podcasts that you follow as well as podcasts that you've listened to. And it will, refresh every day and give you fresh new ideas as to what you can listen to. So, one of the things that we do really well as a company, we know we're good at it, is music and music podcasts, music playlists. Discover Weekly is, every week it blows my mind. I don't know how they've done it, but I think we're kind of leaning on the music team to see the innovation that they provided. It feels silly not to have a look at what they've done and see how we can apply that to podcast discoverability. Because I think, I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that discoverability across the industry has been an issue for however long.
Yeah.
This is something that we've launched that's quite new. We're really optimistic about it, and hopefully, it's going to be helpful. I've got a deck that explains in a bit more detail, so I don't know if I can send that to you to pass on to everyone.
Yeah, feel free.
It just kind of explains how it works and a bit more information about it. But I'm going to be here all day, and obviously tonight, drinks. Let's all have a bev.
Secret venue revealed.
Sorry. But yeah, please come and ask me any questions. I'm going to be here all day. It'd be great to. There's a few faces I recognise, but a few I don't. So it'd be great to chat to you. So please grab me.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes now.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Does anyone have any thoughts? There's a lady at the back.
How do you improve your chances of being algorithmically linked to people who might like to listen to it?
It's based on what the users listen to. So you can't school that podcast with your metadata in your podcast. So it's based purely on what the users listen to, linked to podcasts there. So in the same genre, that kind of thing. What I would recommend is that you use Spotify, you encourage your listeners to follow your podcast on Spotify. So there's a follow button, which traditionally I don't think it's been used very often. So I'd encourage that. Linking to your podcast on Spotify helps as well. But yeah, it is based purely on what the listeners have listened to. Not that I know of, but the deck that I've got will probably explain that in a bit more detail, so I can send it round to make sure that everyone has a look. And come and ask me some more questions afterwards if you want.
And I think something like, yesterday afternoon, as the went out, I looked up yesterday after Pod News was talking about it, and there's something like 85,000 people subscribe or following that playlist already.
There was 65,000 when I looked the day after it was launched, so
so it's coming, so it's probably over 100 now, so it's quite a big little space. Big little space. But yeah, do you know, it'd be really useful to get feedback. If anyone's used it, if anyone's tried it out, please come and let me know what your experience is with it. I'd be really interested to know what people think of it, to be honest. And I don't know if you know, but on my daily podcast is basically all the podcasts that are here today, because I've been listening to everybody's podcast. And we've actually made a podcast playlist for Pods Up North. So go and have a look for Pods Up North 2019, and everyone who is on stage is on that. There's an episode on that playlist.
Cool.
We would like to get more knowledge of podcasts in the region, so please inform Ant and I, and we'll start building a playlist of yours as well. You've got your hand up. Hello.
Hiya.
Are you the best podcaster?
I
From John O'Wall's description.
I sat here on the front last week and had to mention it. So I did a podcast for the BBC, which was thank you. So I did a deep dive podcast for the BBC, but we had a lot of music in it BBC, we've got all the licensing sorted out, and we could use it really creatively, and it was great. And I hear so much from independents that want to use music in their podcast but can't because of all the myriad of licensing problems. And I'm wondering, is there a way that Spotify, because you have all the licensing to stream music, could help independent podcasters to put music into their podcasts and kind of, it'd have to be on Spotify, but a way so that, because it's such a creative way, tool in podcasting that's just denied to most producers.
Licensing's very tricky. That's the first thing I learned when I started working at Spotify. The licenses we have to stream music as music are not the same as the licenses we have to put music in podcasts. So we have to be very careful about the distinction there and copyright. And we did a series about The Clash quite recently called Stay Free. Please listen to it. It's incredible. 40 years since London Calling's release. And that was a BBC co-production, actually. We did that with BBC Studios. And that was a really good test for us because we had to license all the music separately from The Clash's back catalogue on Spotify. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, but we are doing some work on that. So hopefully, at some point, it's not going to be in the near future, but it's something that we're looking into because, as you say, it's a problem across the industry in terms of licensing. So, yeah. Not my area of expertise, though, I'm not going to lie.
Okay, can I have a big round of applause for Alex?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so have you got your takeaways from that session and have you posted it on your socials? Pods Up North 19. I can say we're